All right, everyone. We start off today over the debate with pesticide usage in agriculture. Link in the description archived, of course, it's quite fascinating. This comes from the perspective of an agricultural guild, basically. The EPA is going to provide recommendations in association with several other bureaus. That's all sort of a nexus. You've got the Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, Health and Human Services, and so forth. RFK Jr. is involved with this, of course, trying to make recommendations with regards to the usage of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides on agricultural crops to look at whether these are, healthy, to look at whether there's any sort of long-term damage to humans as a result of ingesting trace amounts of these materials. Maybe they'll recommend looking back at the studies that determined them to be safe if they're actually in use. And farmers, or at least the union here, are skeptical. They're upset over the fact that the study is even being conducted. Now, let me put on my first word here about agriculture. I'm a Vermonter, so I grew up around family farms and stuff like that. Some of them are larger, some of them are smaller, and they provide a great number of great things. Vegetables, fruits, milk, cheese, honey, all of these wonderful things. Beef, pork, chickens and so forth, eggs. Farming is the lifeblood of any country. If you have a water supply and a food supply, which is stable, then, you can always build, a lean-to or something like that. At least you won't starve or die of fucking thirst. That being said, while I support farmers, and I've done a lot of gardening, I've never run a farm, but you can scale it, and you can grow a hell of a lot in a small backyard garden. Let's put it that way. You're gonna have to can a lot of those cucumbers and turn them into pickles. By the way, they cost a shit ton of money at this point, especially if they're grown organically in Vermont like mine are. The debate hinges on whether farmers are going to be able to continue producing enough food in the absence of certain, especially pesticides, but also herbicides and so forth. I would answer that the answer is yes, they are capable of it. It's just that the U.S. model, effectively with agriculture, it's highly interventionist, number one, highly regulated, number two, and this actually raises costs, by the way. And number three is pumped full of chemicals, to the point where Mexico has demanded no corn imports from the United States, despite the fact that we grow a ton of it. This is not even a protectionist move. Their ethos behind it was, hey, we can grow our own corn. We can use rotary farming and other techniques and, heirloom varieties and stuff like that. We can supply our own corn and it won't need as much, chemical fertilizer and stuff like that. Chemical fertilizers also being a problem. Phosphate being probably the biggest agricultural issue of our time. It will rear its ugly head before most of you are dead, because we're running low on easily exploited resources of phosphates. And unfortunately, people haven't fully woken up to things like hugelkultur, terra preta, creating potash yourself, and things like that. Hey, you're not even allowed to burn wood in some parts of the country, depending on the weather. Hasn't caught up to modernity. I would say, look at the nation of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. It is a very, very small country. They are the second largest food exporter in the entire world and supply much of their own produce and so forth as well. Realize part of that is climactic and it's due to geography, but they've managed to eliminate, I believe at last count, 90% of pesticide usage in their country. There is a huge amount of organic food being grown. There's a lot of, I mean, hugelkultur, is often done there. A huge reduction in pesticide, herbicide, etc. usage in the country, and yet they're a huge net exporter of food, despite being smaller than, I believe, the state of Maine. Whereas in the United States, we're pumping the ground which is now carbon poor in many areas, especially in the Midwest, full of chemicals, including fertilizer, which runs off and creates other environmental problems. And the long-term impact of this has been dire. You have algal blooms, you have, cyanobacteria and stuff like that. And certainly that's been a problem here in Vermont, in Lake Champlain, in the Champlain Valley for a very long time. I can remember seeing reports of that as a kid. Pesticides and insecticides and so forth. Basically, it's usually not necessary to utilize these chemicals with proper farming techniques. And they managed, 100 years ago, they weren't spraying things with glycophosphate and stuff like that, and or whatever it's called. They weren't doing that, and yet they managed to create enough food for the population. Now, the population, of course, is much larger. So is the amount of land dedicated to agriculture, though. Rotational farming, terra preta, things like that. Certainly diatoms, they can be used to destroy insects as well. Now, of course, you don't want to destroy the bees and stuff like that. But if you've got a cornfield, the bees are not pollinating the corn, they're wind pollinated. And since corn and grains and things like that form a staple backbone of our agricultural economy, I think we can probably make do by crop dusting with that. Just saying, it's a novel idea. And so, generally, while I side with the farmers on most issues, I have to take umbrage with the idea that we have to spray all the crops with a bunch of chemicals, and they're looking into, hey, are these actually safe? The EPA is like, is this study from 1975 actually valid? Well, let's look into the methodology. And so they're going to be preparing a report and fronting it to multiple bureaus and so forth. I personally organically farm. I don't use any form of pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, anything like that. Does this mean that a few plants get, bitten down by some insects? Yeah, although the rodents are much more pernicious. They destroyed the entire beet crop this year, by the way. And the garden is admittedly a little bit fallow at the moment. Well, a lot of it fallow. But it is possible to farm. You do not need these chemicals. I would think that by better farming techniques, the top end, like having to rotate your crops, companion planting and stuff, I would for most crops anyway, I would think that the top end investment would be less than the amount that you're spending on the pesticides and the fungicides and stuff like that. Sometimes you'll have an off year. I would be much happier if the government would simply help farmers out if they do suffer crop loss through no fault of their own, and absorb that cost, then absorb the cost of the increased medical expenses of people in the United States as a result of ingesting poison effectively. Other countries have shown us that it's not necessary to use these things, generally speaking. Now, insecticide specifically, if you have a big ass locust swarm, okay, I can imagine that dusting them and killing them off is one thing. But for the average farm, you don't really need pesticides. It's like I've edited works. It used to be the government tried to find ways to help farmers make a little extra money. I edited an excellent work from, I believe, 1910. I can't remember the author's name. I think her last name was Henkel, and it was a government circular, and it was like, hey, here are some weeds that are used as medicine. You should gather these, dry them. Here's how to dry them, and then you can sell them at market, and you can get, supplementary income. The government used to encourage, small Liberty Gardens and stuff like that. Now it discourages people from doing so and, sides with the housing authorities. So if you think that the government, especially in its past incarnation, is necessarily a reliable indicator of the fact that certain chemicals you would use, in farming are necessarily safe, that they don't impregnate the plants with poison, or cause any human issues when they're sprayed and, the cloud of poison goes off and people inhale it, then I got a bridge, in Florida to sell you. Yeah, I got some swampland. It's real cheap. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to trust eBay, even its current determination. even if it says, okay, yeah, these aren't good. I'm not necessarily going to trust them until I look into the actual peer-reviewed research. That the peer review process means much either. Ultimately, you should make as much of your own food as possible. You can control the quality of the supply. And of course, the average person does not have enough land to have their own mini farm to supply their eggs and chicken meat and have a couple of pigs and stuff like that. They don't have enough money to buy the land necessary. But it is possible for many people to do so. And then you get local syndicates that can sprout up and they can all cross trade and people can buy their wares and stuff like that, like a farmer's market in every town. Seems a lot better to me. And you can do it organically. It is not actually that difficult to do. That's about all. Peace out.